Well, friends, welcome to another Word of Gord. And once again, we're examining the lighting. And where is my lighting director? Where are you? And not that good. But we'll bring in a little more help here from the from the sides. Now, we're going to do, well, that's darker than before, that's even worse. We're going to continue with Average Folks in the Afterlife, Part 2. And I'll just move the book around. We're going to continue from the same book, Travelers in Eternity, because there's more interesting stuff here. And couldn't get to it last time. And then we'll switch to another book called Philip in the Spheres by Alice Gilbert, from around the same time, post-World War II, 46, 47. And for those of you who are worried if we're ever going to get up to the present day, yes, we will, eventually. There's a lot of good stuff to get through. Now, to continue with the family grouping that we were familiar with from Travelers in Eternity before, I'll just move right on in because there's some interesting transitions within this family. They all were individuals and all made their separate entrances, shall we say. From Frank Gibbs. I did not know of Peter's passing. In different circumstances, of course, I should have been at the terminus to meet him. But a soldier continues to be a soldier over here, and I was under military discipline. You may think that odd, but as a soldier in the last war, 1418, I had to be in this one, though it has been on a strange and gigantic scale here. But I have recently seen Peter, and be assured he is all right. The poor old chap had rather a thin time for the first few days according to your time, after he left his body. He isolated himself from others in life and was too self-centered, so he was for a while in isolation, in a grey twilight, when he came here. Not even his mother was able to get through to meet him. Not even his mother. Think about that. Being so self-centered, he was unable to send out the urgent call that is always picked up and answered. Self-centered. He kept thinking of his home and made desperate struggles to get back to it. He hovered about the place, I was told. He tried to rouse and reach his wife. Then later he himself told me he saw his housekeeper, followed her, spoke to her, ordered her, begged her to listen to him, and she did not pay the slightest attention to him. He said he had never felt so exasperated in his life. He fairly blazed with rage. He even hunted Anne. She was a less misty figure than anyone. He shouted at Anne, but though there seemed to be at one moment something like a recognition, for she stopped and seemed to listen, still she ignored him and went on thinking of other things, not paying any attention. Later, figures on earth became a little clearer. He said nothing was more awful than the day of his funeral. He could hear the mourners and even his son and his wife talking, and they were all more or less saying that he was asleep and at peace, when he was neither asleep nor at peace, when he was most maddeningly alive. He said it was real torture to hear that kind of nonsense talked. Point. It was the loneliness of that fairly knocked him out, for the alternative of being utterly ignored in his own home was that of drifting about in a grey twilight. There was no sign or sound to it, only an unearthly stillness. He could not travel on, and still there was nothing. He hadn't known what the word fear meant before, but he said after a while he became absolutely terrified, lost every scrap of nerve, broke down as he had never done in his life before. Then he cried to his wife for help. He couldn't pray, and oddly enough that cry was his salvation. It was the end of his self-centeredness, his iron determination and pride not to give in an inch, nor to make a fool of himself. When at last he was the weak fool who cried like a child, help came, and there was an end to his misery in that twilight loneliness of his own making. So there, a little instructional psychology there. The same thing from another family member. Dovi. I have seen Peter. He had rather trying awakening into this world, but for that he can only blame himself. We were aware of his passing. We knew he was in no man's land, in the only world of death. That is to say, the world of complete isolation. Peter always cut himself off from other people. So though we knew what a comfort it would be to his wife if we met him, we could not do so. For he raised up impossible barriers. He might still be in that world of night if it had not been for his wife. Her prayers and love for him saved him, shattered the barriers. You may not believe this, but it is true. When Peter broke down, his wife's thoughts and prayers linked him up with us. Only through them were we able to locate him. There is a prayer and a love, to put it in biblical language, that can shatter the gates of hell. That's what Peter's wife did for him. Thanks to her, the barriers came down, and Muriel and I traced him and found him. Poor fellow, he was all to pieces, but we soon got him round. It was probably the only time in his life he was broken. It was absolutely necessary for his growth, if indeed he was to grow at all. With the exception of his last illness, he had, on the whole, a soft time on earth. He had to experience not only the hardship of physical pain, he had to know spiritual pain and terror. In a word, he had to be broken, as all men are at some time broken, in order that he might be remade. We talked to Peter, we reassured him, and then took him to a place of rest. There the invalid recovered, finding his poise. Muriel searched for his mother and brought them together. He is experiencing the small boy's happiness in her company. It is a kind of trustful, confident happiness which we could not give him. He went to her home and remained with her for a while. I cannot tell what lies before him, but he is at peace now, and he has recovered his normal outlook. Little bit more here from Hilda, July 9th, 44. Oh, I see I haven't answered your questions about my YMCA. Yes, my new home is modeled on my old home in almost every respect. It holds together fairly well and only begins to come to pieces when I am in wrong moods. On Earth, evil thinking produces a war which destroys homes. In this world, substance is sensitive to mind radiations, so destructive thought can cause to fade out or destroy the fabric of a home. My lovely Elizabethan furniture, the dinner table, the glass and silver dishes on it, vanished one day when Arthur was here and he got in a bad temper. It really was most awkward. You know, Frank and Nigel like to enjoy a good dinner just as they did on Earth. Actually, eating is unnecessary in the earthly sense and is only practiced by those who cherish an old habit that gave them pleasure. When Frank and I saw their favorite dinner and wines fading into the air, they looked so dismayed and disappointed that Arthur and I burst out laughing, forgot the cause of our disagreement, and so stopped further destruction. But they all had to go on without the pleasure of a good dinner that day. It is easy to destroy, but it takes a little time to build up. You see, we have to be much more careful than you are with our thoughts. But you will be glad to hear that for an unusually long time I have been keeping my good resolutions. So Wickenden, like a beautiful Tudor house, stands on its high hill with its dining room, sitting room, drawing room, library, bedrooms, kitchens all intact and just as they used to be, only rather better. Nothing is faded or worn out in them. Of course, I can't tell you how long this pleasant state of affairs will last. A tempest of violent, unpleasant thoughts would make it all collapse to the very foundations. So peace of mind, if you want fine living, is necessary over here. At the same time, as Harold says, temper can have its proper outlet in this world in a fine creative passion, which, particularly in landscapes, can produce a loveliness far surpassing anything you have seen on Earth. Power to write is leaving me. Hilda. Point. Communicators from there seem to have a certain amount of power which fades as they exercise themselves, and they often make such references. There's been a number of descriptions of country homes so far. I thought you'd like to skip to mentions of cities, of which there are many on the various astral planes. Hilda continued, "There are great cities over here for people who like cities. Harold has taken me on a short visit to Purgatory, which is another London. There he took me to hear operas where prima donnas from Earth are still having their triumphs. But it was a painful rather than a pleasurable experience. My senses or perceptions are so much sharpened, I felt some of the evil and cruel passions of certain of these souls who only lately arrived in their purgatory. But this etheric London isn't all purgatory. There were some lovely people living contentedly in small houses in rather grubby streets. They were good souls, but such streets were their idea of heaven, so they found it. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. They will gradually be weaned from the shabby idea of paradise when they learn to throw themselves more outward, when they use the wings of their minds and visit other people's worlds, beautiful places far from the grime and noises of great towns. But of course, to some people, ugliness and noise are the most desirable conditions in which to live. So they will have their wish and reside for a time after death in such squalid surroundings. I am delighted to hear that you are putting my book together, How They Live After Death. Would be a nice Baedeker guide title for it, but rather prosaic. I never thought it could be so difficult to shape a book. Will you ever be able to put my bits and pieces together? And now, my dear, there will be a paper shortage here if I don't stop. Always humorous, these dead people, aren't they? Don't know if I can get more light in this or not. Maybe. That's not seeming to be working very terribly well. Oh, now, there's something. That seems a little better, doesn't it? Twitter. Well, maybe not. Anyway, we'll go straight to Philip in the Spheres, a book between the mother, Alice Gilbert, and the son, Philip Gilbert. And Alice seemed to experience telepathic contact with Philip for many years after he passed as a soldier, around 4 a.m. in the morning. And she'd get up and scribble things down endlessly, and came out with 3 very good books, which of course are not easy to find, but you know, I've got one. So more from that era. People caught in the World War, in the how shall I put it? The great chaos of influences, of energetic influences crisscrossing the planet at that time, which they still are in war zones particularly. And if you find this a little dated, think about, Iraq or Syria or certain places in Africa where, people are passing into the other world in fear, terror, anxiety, suffering from tortures. It's quite eternal, these things. On a lesser scale, perhaps, but, quite eternal. Nothing changes that much. From Philip in the Spheres. This is Philip. I get busier and busier. This is because I am speeding up my processes. I do not have to stop and think deliberately how to get places. It is like a baby learning to walk, or in my case, as I knew it all previously, like someone who has been in bed a long time, getting out and trying his legs again. I am learning to create a set of surroundings for myself. Once still clinging to some incarnation wishes, I made a complete and perfect car, and I got into it and began to drive. But it did not work at all well, for at once my ego was away and beyond it. It was a thought creation which could only function effectively in dense physical conditions. It is not easy to explain how thought creation works. Things which are of the essence of mind, such as music and musical instruments, function here admirably. But objects which really appertain to the physical earth, such as cars, only have an outward semblance. They do not work well, mainly because our own methods of transit are so different. But a ship can be made to function in a gentle gliding on great glimmering sheets of water. It is a fine sensation when one is wanting to rest and whiz about. Whizzing round has been one of my greatest pleasures since I came here. That gorgeous sensation of pure speed and no fear of crashing. I practiced for some time just speeding at some solid object like a mountain and passing through it. And this took me a bit of doing at first because my Earth memory took me a bit of Earth memory was so strong, and instinctively I dodged. Now the novelty is wearing off. Some timid, unadvanced folk take centuries. It is very funny to watch them practicing. Some of you might recall in my spirit contact with Hunter Thompson some years ago, I showed him how to whiz about and race right up to mountains and then stop at the last second. I am still training newly arrived helpers. Everyone possible is roped in. Does the law of attraction still apply? I mean, would, for example, welfare workers gravitate to your crowd automatically? That's the question from the mother, by the way. It all depends on what their inner motive has been, not always what one would think. But my set are mostly ex-servicemen, young, and from the point of view of their last incarnation, and gay, and we all work among our own sort. Also, we need a good deal of power, for we have to do some ticklish jobs. We fight, as I told you before, with the force of magnetic thought to disperse clumps of evil thought images, entities who, also obeying the law of attraction, are forming nuclei of negation, seeking to dominate the less evolved who are merely weak. Yes, evil thought images, entities who, also obeying the law of attraction, are forming nuclei of negation, seeking to dominate the less evolved who are merely weak. I wrote about such things in More Adventures in Eternity, participating in such maneuvers in the astral myself while out of body at night over the Middle East, where there's a lot of, even years ago, not just now, much negative energy from hatred and anger and resentment amongst races and religions, and negative entities are attracted to that dark energy and sort of glom onto it and just make it worse. And I talked about dark clouds of negativity having to be split up by large beams of light. We seem to have had a pause there. Not quite sure what happened. A little pause in YouTube, and I'll check later to see that you got that. It is not exactly a descent in your sense, for space is neither up nor down. It is everywhere. What we do to reduce our speed, that is what we do. We reduce our speed. It is almost impossible to put into words that you could understand. But by doing this, we come visible to the lower planes and they to us. Otherwise, they can't impinge on us. You think a great deal, I watch it, about my work in the lower astral. Yes, it goes on and on. It seems endless, the number of people needing help. Our control department has lists of them, running into millions. Yes, literally. Of course there are many helpers too, but not nearly as many as we would need. For these people often need more than one visit. They need first getting at, then nursing, in a way of speaking. In that way, it is just like real-life welfare work. How do you locate these people? Do you go to a certain place for them? That's the mother. This varies. It is very difficult to explain and even more difficult to do sometimes. In fact, it is a case of sheer tracking down now that the actual battlefield picking up is over. That was comparatively easy because our people were on the spot. What is so difficult to explain is, as I said above, that it is not so much a case of place as a state where must find people. It has been done quite systematically here. Lists have been kept of all people who have died violently in any way recently, and those who are still unsettled here. If they are in the lower astral, it means that I have, as I said, to decrease my rate of vibration. Oh dear. It was difficult to master the knack of it, but now it is easy, as a matter of will, thought, and rhythm. By doing this, I am able to see people on that rate of vibration, just as you on Earth can see each other, but not us. Important point, all these rates of vibration: Earth, lower astral, middle astral, upper astral. If you're focused at any one of those levels, Earth or the lower astrals, you won't, focused on Earth, you won't see the lower astral. People in the lower astral, focused on the lower astral, won't see the mid astral. So people, good-hearted, kind, loving people that live in the upper or middle astral that are doing these rescue efforts, they can't be seen by people in the lower astral because their vibration is the wrong sort. So they have to limit themselves. They have to slow down. Anyway, just a point. It's still the case today. Nothing has changed like that. In the case of the very lowest astral, the frequency is less and not more than Earth frequency. It is a good thing that comparatively few people gravitate there. Most folk are around about the Earth. Then I track down the being I am seeking. Often I have to find some way of linking by an Earth clue, such as going to where they lived and touching their things, which puts me onto the correct telepathic link by which I think myself into their presence and they see me. Of course, en route, I often bump into someone I'm not seeking, such as some of the people I've described. In fact, they are all over the place, people stuck in the bog of their illusions. It is really terrible. Having located my objective, I usually, by a certain power I have acquired, a power of imagining myself into other people's minds, make myself part of his illusion first, and then I act as my intuition prompts me. That is why the job suits me. It is never monotonous. Each case is different, and you know how I hated monotony. Me too. A difficult aspect is that the repressed power in me, which is dammed up when I decreased my rate of vibration, is buzzing in me like a thudding dynamo, and I can't hold it in check for long. So that, especially at first when I was not used to it, I was apt to vanish as far as the other person was concerned, which simply means that I have gone back to my real state. Incidentally, this explains the swiftly vanishing appearances we make to clairvoyance. And I don't mean the purely pictorial photographic impressions that we project, but real visions. Our breaks will only hold for a very short period. Point. It takes effort for them to materialize. I think this was covered rather well in the movie Ghost a number of years ago. The willpower and effort that it takes to materialize even an astral foot to kick a can across the subway. Remember that scene? Would you like me to begin to tell you a bit about the fairly regular rhythm of my days now? Though day is not the word, for we are not dependent on sun for light, we are ourselves, to a certain extent, luminous in ratio with the degree of our advancement. Time, as far as we are concerned, is governed by rhythm. As great a tyrant as the clock. A little pause in that YouTube broadcasting there. Take my talk to you as a start. I'm always round you at that time. I watch you eat your breakfast, take your notebook, and we are off. After that, having seen you settled for the day, I now have the habit of telepathing to our HQ for my assignments of work to be done. And having digested this, I go first and make all the needed inquiries as to the location of the person I'm to seek out. If he is a bad egg and in the lower astral, I get in touch with some of the band to go with me as a bodyguard. Sometimes it is a general scavenging trip there to see if we can persuade a few people to follow us and escape. Those trips are very difficult and need all our determination. Sometimes it is not a lower astral trip, though they seem to pick on me a good deal for these unsavory jobs. Sometimes it is to the earthbound or to the near-earth condition. But for both these jobs, I have to put the brake on myself as described. It is quite a fatiguing effort of will and power. Having finished my welfare work, it is difficult to say how long it takes, as time is not the same. I go for a little light relief to one of the places of instruction. I do maths or I listen to music, and often when doing that, I use it as a sort of funnel to go out into the wider space circle and increase my power so that I breathe for a while the air of a further plane of existence. Music is one of the corridors for evolving upwards. Even a very unspiritual entity can, if he comprehends music, flash upwards for a brief period, but he can't stay there if his whole being is not in tune. If I am feeling like it, I act the fool with our band, and sometimes we all go for a tour of places we knew and watch the antics of our old friends. Of course, ça va sans dire, as I often, in the midst of all I do, flash back to you. And as I told you, because of the very strong link between us, if you are, as so often, enjoying a little joke with yourself, I sense it. I feel that little tingle of humor stir in me. It often irradiates me, even when I'm in the midst of one of my difficult jobs. Anyway, I think that's probably enough for part 2. And we'll certainly do 3 and 4 and work our way up to the present day. But there are so many interesting books to read and colors to look at. Oh, I should have done it this way. Much better. Sorry for the darkness, friends. And we'll see if this worked out. There was a couple of pauses in recording, and it may look rather strange, but we'll see. We'll see, as we always see as sentient beings in eternity, trapped in time for just a little while. So, farewell, friends, and I hope you benefit from the wisdom here encoded, and I will see you again very soon with part 3.